The subject of integrity is vast and complicated, and there is a tendency to speak at length on it. We have a nice chunk of time, and I'm going to try to not abuse that by going over. That's not always so easy. I gave a speech a little while ago. I'd like to tell you about this. And I was going on for a while, and I thought the audience was into it. And suddenly a guy starts walking out. I said, "Excuse me, sir, I'm in the middle of a speech." And he said, "You know, I know that." And I said, "Well, why are you leaving? Where are you going?" And he said, "I'm going to get a haircut." I said, "A haircut? Why didn't you get a haircut before the speech?" And he said, "Before the speech, I didn't need one." So, still with that, I want to thank Latrez for giving me an hour and 15 minutes. I hope that I provide you with something of value that you'll take into the cocktail reception, where we will continue to discuss it. Of course, the subject of integrity, talking about integrity, does not have to be that lengthy. It can be very short. And I'm going to demonstrate that now by asking everyone here, is there anyone here who lacks integrity? Anyone here who lacks integrity? I saw one hand sort of trying to move up, but so it appears that everybody here possesses integrity. So with Latrez's permission, we might be able to cut this short, and we'd have time to get a haircut even if you don't need one. So the question that always occurs to me when nobody raises their hand, of course, is why is it that everyone believes they possess integrity, but all around us we see the complete breakdown of it in virtually every institution: politics and government, business, academia, sports, advertising, medicine, clergy, law, the whole gamut. So we have a situation in which everyone believes that they possess it, are assured of their possession of integrity, and are also expert in judging others who don't have it. So this problem has vexed me. And I got into this work of speaking and teaching about it because I was trying to figure that out. What's up with that? What causes that dilemma? And I'm not happy to admit, but freely admit, that I don't have all the answers about that, because you see, I think integrity is something that's not that easy to practice. It's not that easy to do. And I'm going to give you a story from my political career that I think displays that fact. Several years ago, I was representing a political candidate who, for purposes of this discussion, I'm going to identify as he or him. So we keep it sort of gender neutral in that sense. I think you probably get my meaning. And we were gathered in a room in the Senate office of this candidate to assess the damage that had just been done during the debate of this candidate's party the night before. And there was a debate for the party, and this candidate did very badly. You see, he was caught in a question about a very controversial policy by his governor. And he was trying to back up the governor, but also distance himself from the governor. And it was very clumsy, and the press pounced on it and seized on it as another indication of this particular candidate's indecisiveness, for which he was known, no question about that. So we all sat in this room trying to figure out what to do, and everybody was offering their comments, basically about damage control. How do we spin this? How do we maneuver the answer so that we can get out from under the damage that was done? And it occurred to me that no one in that group, the candidate was there, of course, no one in that group said, why don't we just explain truthfully that the candidate was torn between two independent and legitimate interests, support for his governor and his own variation on the position, which he thought was more in the public interest. Why couldn't the public understand that? Why couldn't the candidate take a risk in explaining that? Okay, but no one did that. So that's, on a high level, how people don't know how to practice integrity. To me, that's an example of not knowing how to do it. But I'm going to bring it down to the basic level. In a situation that I assume all of you have been in, I'm going to ask you, how many of you have made a lunch date or any kind of date, then gotten a better offer, and then lied to the person that you first had the date with the reason why you're canceling? Okay, so the same lady who's almost about to tell you, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so we've all been in that situation, even though nobody's raising their hand. Okay, so the question is, if we can't tell a friend, truthfully, the reason why we're canceling a lunch date with them, how are people in the room, like me, and you've been in that same room, going to guide a public official, in this case a candidate for the presidency, to speaking the truth? And how is that candidate himself going to speak to a nation truthfully if his advisors don't know how to do it? How is the candidate going to know how to do it? And I talk about them in the room, the other advisors, as if they were distant from me. But I was in that room. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. Didn't know how to raise my voice and speak the truth. And so this brings me to the first in a series of myths about integrity that we're going to explore today. And this is the first one, that the practice of integrity is an innate skill that comes naturally to people of good moral character. Now, I'm going to challenge this, and I just did. But how many people believe that this is the case? Okay. I think most people believe that this is the case. Because of my observation, teaching, and being in those rooms, I wouldn't raise my hand either if someone asked me. Why? Because we are taught to believe that integrity is the most basic, the most revered quality. And if we don't have it, if we don't have it naturally, then there's something wrong with us. Because as a matter of good breeding and good education, it should come naturally. So we're going to look at this today. I think the confidence, the belief that we know how to practice integrity comes from our confidence in very basic kinds of formulations about what integrity is. And you presented those to us. I guess I pressed that thing without knowing it. You presented over 80 or almost 80 definitions to us of integrity. And I had to try to summarize those. And I want to thank you for that. Latrez got that out to you, and you all responded. And that was something. That's probably the best response, one of the best responses I've ever gotten for that questionnaire. I want to thank you for that. This is a summary of the definitions. And you can see how truthfulness and honesty, the right thing, comes up. Again, I think almost as if this is a natural talent. If only we see what it is, we know how to do it. So what I'd like to do is give you an example also from the scenarios that you responded to. And let's try to apply one of these principles, the definitions of integrity, to this scenario. Something common enough. I'd like to pick, for purposes of this exercise, the golden rule. Everybody, can somebody state it for me, the golden rule? Okay, thank you. Everybody knows what it is because it's not only the hallmark of Judaism and Christianity, but also religions around the world. It's a fundamental moral principle. So let's see how it works in this scenario. So a campaign contributor comes up to you and says, I really need your support on this matter before the county because it's really important to me. I believe in it. Of course, I wouldn't be asking you if I didn't, but it's really, really important. Now, if you were in his spot with something really important affecting your livelihood, your family, whatever it was, you might sound the same way and want him to do exactly what he's asking you to do. Except there's a pesky little problem, and it is that you also represent the public. And the public never wants you to be diverted from your duty to them by any interest, even though they know that, of course, you receive contributions from wealthy individuals who support you for whatever reason they support you, but they're going to ask you for things from time to time. They don't want to know about that. And you understand that. If you remember the public, that's the way you'd look at it. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that the golden rule, as substantial and powerful as it is in our moral universe, is not particularly effective when we're dealing with more complex situations. When I say complex situations, I mean conflicts of interest. Now, conflicts of interest have a nasty connotation. Okay, that's the band accompaniment that I ordered for this occasion. Conflict of interest have a nasty connotation. Why? Because there's an entire body of law designed to eliminate that. And what do we call that? Ethics regulation. Okay. The world of ethics, as we understand it, is getting rid of conflicts of interest. That's what it's about. So one of the things that I want to talk about today and leave you with is a distinction between ethics and integrity. This is the distinction that I am going to use for the rest of the day, and if you find it helpful, you will use for the rest of your lives. And here's the distinction. Ethics is a body of law that's promoted to eliminate conflicts of interest, and it's enforced by sanctions. In Florida, we should know about this because, as you have no doubt heard, as I heard, Florida leads the nation in ethics violations. Now, I don't know if Florida, I don't really think there's anyone who leads. I think it's bad all over. But somebody's got to be number one, and you're it. Okay, you're welcome. Integrity is something else. Integrity is when you have a competition of interest. You can call it a conflict of interest, competition of duties, and there's no one telling you what to do. There's no code. The contributor situation is one of them. There's no law that tells you how to modulate that competition of interest. Now, I've been talking about competition of interests, but let's take a look at it from a standpoint of duty. Do you have, who would say, I'll ask you, do you believe that there's a duty to the campaign contributor? Would you say there's a duty to the campaign contributor? However you define it. We're going to get to that. Yes. Mostly yes. Okay. All right. Yes and no. Well, you disagreed on the questionnaire too. There's certainly a duty to the public, right? I mean, you can answer yes because we are public officials. There's no fear of embarrassment. I mean, there's no wrong answer on this. But what you can see, I think, or at least some of you agree, that there's a competition of duties. Let's look at that. What is a duty? I'm going to come back to this. A duty is an expectation to fulfill is an obligation to fulfill the reasonable expectation of a person or group of persons. Okay, it sounds a little bit dense, but let's take a look at this. We have names for duties. So let's kind of look at what a duty is. Anybody want to try that? Anybody want to give me a duty? What is the name for the duty that you have to your spouse? Okay, love, honor. What else did I hear? Fidelity, very good. Would you agree these are duties? I also heard loyalty. Who said that? Thank you. I don't know if you did, but I'm thanking you. Let me give you an example of the duty of loyalty. My wife and I have been married for a long time. We have a fabulous relationship, I must tell you. We met in college, and I was a communications major, and she was a theater major. So I talk as much as I want, and she acts like she's listening. So this is what we're doing. Anybody been in that same situation? Okay. So that is part of the duty of loyalty. Is there a duty, what do we call the duty to one's country? Citizenship? Okay. Patriotism? That's a great one. Anything else? What do we call the duty to a client if you have their funds? Fiduciary duty. Probably seminars on that as well. That's what a lawyer has and so forth. Is there a duty of truthfulness? Okay. Anybody have a problem with that? Duty of truthfulness. Now we're going to lay these duties out. This is where I probably should tell you that when I do these seminars for a day, sometimes longer, we spend a lot of time on duties. And why? Because the other myth, the second, we're going to have 4 of them. The second myth is that integrity involves a decision between right and wrong. Another thing I think most of you probably believe. But I think it's useful to start thinking about integrity as resolving a competition, not between right and wrong, but between 2 rights. Like the duty to a campaign contributor, whatever that is. It may not be the duty to give him decisive influence over policy, but there's some duty there when you ask for the support. And the duty to the public. So you have this balancing, not right and wrong, right and right. So try to think of that distinction. And there are so many duties that we could spend time on. But today we're going to spend time on and focus on the principal duties of loyalty that we see all the time. That underlies the duty to country, to the duty to the spouse, fiduciary duty, duty to a boss, duty to a political party, duty to a campaign contributor. We can call that the duty of loyalty. And then on the other hand, the duty of truthfulness. Now, you believe there's a duty of truthfulness. Do you believe that there is a duty to tell the person with whom you're canceling the lunch date the reason for canceling? Do you believe that that's a duty of truthfulness? Okay, so I think if one person raises their hand, I think that means there are at least 10 who won't. And what about the duty to the public in the campaign contributor scenario that we discussed? That's a duty of truthfulness, is it not? Okay. And what about the situation that I described that I was in with a presidential candidate? Do the political advisors in that room have a duty of truthfulness to try to guide the candidate toward a way of explaining the difficulty that he found himself in? In other words, to speak up? Yeah. And does the candidate have a duty to speak truthfully to the American public? Okay. No problem with that. Okay, so does a person have a duty to tell the truth when someone asks them their golf score? Okay, why not? I'm sorry? Okay, so here it is. I was playing golf with Bill Clinton when he was president of the United States. One of the most stressful experiences of my life. And I'm not kidding. And fortunately, a cocktail party follows this, so anybody who's interested in either integrity or that, we can talk about it. Well, we get to the 18th hole, and we're done. And there are hundreds of people out there. And someone says, Mr. President, what was your score? And he says, 83. Now, how many golfers are there here? Okay. I can tell you that an 83 is like being on Mars for me. I'm never going to get it. I'm not going to ever get an 83, but at least I know what one looks like, and I don't think he had it. And so I listened when he said it, and I wasn't sure. Maybe he did, but I don't think so. But the question is, does he have an obligation to speak, to answer truthfully to that question? Now, before you answer, I'm going to want a show of hands. I want to ask anybody, does anybody know how golf got its name? You know a joke is coming, right? Okay. So does anybody know the joke? Okay. It's because all the other four-letter words were taken. So is there anybody, I'll buy a drink for anybody who wants to stand up and make a distinction between your golf score and the size of the fish you catch, right? Same kind of thing. Let's go back to our definition of duty. Is there a reasonable expectation, even though he's the President of the United States, that he's going to tell us the truth about his golf score? Is that a reasonable expectation? Is that any more reasonable than expecting real laughter in a television sitcom? Or the truth in advertising? Or to eliminate bluffing in poker? But if he stands in front of the country and says, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, I think it's reasonable that the nation had an expectation that he would tell the truth. And that's a distinction between a reasonable expectation of truth and an expectation that's not reasonable. Does anybody have a problem with that distinction? You see, I was fascinated by your responses to the scenarios. And in most cases, you were split. And Latrez, we ought to work out a way that you can see the results of the survey. Fascinating, I thought. There's only one example in all those scenarios where you did not think that the situation raised a question of integrity. In other words, it was split. But in one case, it was over 50%. Most of you believed that the situation of negative campaign advertising did not raise a question of integrity. Now, I was surprised by that. But that's helpful. I like surprises. I got one yesterday. Do you mind if I tell you this? I got one. You've never seen me before, and I've never seen myself with a beard until about a month ago when I started to grow one. And this was a big event, and I'm coming down from New York to Florida, and I asked my wife, remember my wife? And I said, honey, what do you think of the beard? And she said, well, what do you think? I said, well, I don't know. I think 60 is the new 40. And she said, well, that may be true, but then you're the exception that confirms the rule. So that's, so next time you see me, yeah, so do I. So, well, she added the part, she said, I think 60 is the new 80 in your case. But anyway, I still managed to get up here without using a cane. But, I noticed there's a question. We're going to, so that's a surprising answer. And now we are going to deal with what I found was very surprising in your answers, that negative campaign advertising does not raise a question of integrity. Yes, sir? That was my question. Why? Okay. Thank you. It's good when I can anticipate a question. All right, so let's look at it. This is the fun part. You've probably been waiting for the fun part. I know you've been seeing the film as we've been working out the audio-visual, and that's going to be fun too. Negative campaign advertising. What do we know about it? What do people say about it? What are the two things that people say about negative campaign advertising? Anyone? Well, I can't hear. They hate it. Wait, that's right. Those are the two things. It works, but they hate it. Okay, something's funny about that. I mean, have we really digested that? We expected people, if they hated it, it wouldn't be done, okay? But it works. Okay, so why do people hate it? Let's focus on that. Anyone? It's negative. Anything? Personal, that's true. It's untruthful. It's full of half-truths. Now, where I come from, that's not being truthful. Okay. So it's untruthful. So here we've got this situation in which the people that are seeking an office for which truth is held in the highest esteem, that's what we want from them. It's what we revere in them. But to get elected or to stay elected, they denigrate the very duty that they're sworn to defend. Okay. Do you think that this has something to do with the fact that the approval rating of Congress is, what is it? Yeah, 11, 10, 9. Just to put that in perspective, that is lower than the opinion rating, the approval rating of the United States of America in the Arab countries. So Congress is reviled in its own country because of that. But yet, most of you did not regard that as a breach of the duty of truthfulness. You can change your answer. But I'd like someone to explain, again, I'll buy you a drink, even though I know they're complimentary. If you, maybe that's why, you know, but can you tell me why that is? How, can you explain that dilemma? Yes, ma'am.
A negative statement can still be true.
Yeah, but...
Just because it's negative or doesn't positively... I mean, I'm not in that room there. That's a negative. I'm not there. It's true.
Okay, but I'm asking a little different question. I'm asking, why did most of you say, when asked that question, that you did not believe that negative campaign advertising raised a question of integrity? Yes, sir.
I think you might have answered your own question, because it works. People hate it, but it works. And even someone sitting in an office, kind of went back and said earlier, they're one of those can't get elected sort of modes, so you sort of humble your real feelings on it, because you know it's a tool of the
You compromise your real feelings about it because it's a tool of the industry. Thank you. Just let that sink in for a minute. You compromise your real feelings about it because, may I put words in your mouth? In other words, you say yes. Thank you. In other words, you are so habituated to the debasement of the duty that you no longer regard it as a breach. And habituation to that level of conduct, even though it's ubiquitous and it works, does that make it any less of a duty? What do you think? No. Duty of truthfulness is the duty of truthfulness. Yes, the woman in the back, please.
Yes, I actually don't agree with that opinion at all. I'm in a race right now, and with an opponent who believes in negative campaigning, and he's got a whole team of people that are doing that, and I will not lower myself to that level. And so they're throwing out these barbs, and I don't answer back. I go about telling them what I am, what I can do, and what I will do. And being that I've always been truthful, they realize that this guy is probably not, because I've never gone back on my word. And so I don't always think, not only that, but he started to change his tune because he's looking like the fool now.
Okay, I think that's great. Thank you. Now, I think what's your name?
Donna Fiala.
Donna? Thank you. So what Donna is really saying is, and you can correct me because you said it, I'm just repeating it, is that I take the duty of truthfulness seriously, even though I'm being challenged by someone who doesn't. They may derive some political advantage from breaching the duty of truthfulness, but I will be resourceful in coming up with a strategy to overcome them. Complicated, but that's the bottom line. I will not lower myself, you said. Now, another way of saying that is, and this is part of the reason we're having this seminar, is that you start to think in terms of duties. There is a duty of truthfulness that I am breaching by engaging in negative campaign advertising, even if the other person does it, even if it works, because the duty of truthfulness is clear.
That's not necessarily true. Negative advertising doesn't have to, it can be truthful. Yeah. It depends on how you use it.
Okay.
You got an opponent who's voted, who has a prior commitment, voted for tax increases, and you point that out as part of your campaign. It's truthful. It's in the public record. That is not, I don't call that negative campaign.
That's not what we're talking about.
Okay, she did. We call it negative.
Well, I don't know what her opponent said, but the woman, well, we're talking about half-truths. This example I never used as part of the example, although you could, and we could talk about that, and that could be another seminar, but I never used as an example where the negativity was truthful. Because most of it isn't. Let's face it, let's not kid ourselves about what it is. It's designed to elicit ridicule, it's pejorative, it denigrates the person, and if it holds a slender balance to the truth, maybe it can be excused, but that's not what usually happens.
It's almost never fully truthful. I'm 51 years old, I've seen a lot of negative campaigning, and I haven't seen, I'm going to leave the obvious that maybe there was a truthful negative, but it's out because the slant is the lie too. The slant.
Okay, so there it is. There it is. Now, we could spend a lot of time on this, and as I said, fortuitously, there's a cocktail party afterwards, and we can. But let's go further with this. Why do people do it? Well, we know it works. But if you ask them, they would say what? They would say, well, I've got to do it. Not like Donna said, but I've got to do it because I have to do what politically? I have to, what was win.
Just to your point, it's angering when the negativity is directed towards the person in your party. But when it's directed to the other person, you're like, oh, whoa, okay, I love you.
Okay,
that's exactly what happens.
And what's that about? What's that about? Have you asked yourself whether, when that happens, You're carrying the duty of party loyalty a little too far. We're going to get into that. So be patient with me. This is great that we have questions. I'm going to give you some things to think about in this vein, and then the torrent of questions can follow. Latrez, how are we doing on time? Pretty well, right? Okay, so good. Maybe we can weave some of this in. I'm fascinated by the term political survival. I was a political consultant. I ran for political office. I ran for Congress. I've held political office. I did a lot of things. And I know how I use that word. I used it loosely. Political survival. We all use it loosely. We've all been in rooms where people use it loosely. Why do I say loosely? Let's take a minute and think about what survival really means. Any vets here? Yeah, vets. Thank you. Thank you for being a vet. It's a lot of people. In World War II, POWs, our guys, were interned and forced to make enemy aircraft, Nazi airplanes, to bomb our own guys. Okay. Were they court-martialed? Of course not. Duress. What about killing in self-defense? So the most abominable act morally that you can think of is defensible if it's in self-defense. That's survival. Stealing to feed your children, so forth, mitigates criminal penalties and so forth. So here's the question. Isn't it a stretch to say I have to survive politically by lying about my opponent? Thank you. Or by giving decisive influence over policy to a campaign contributor? Or the example that someone just gave about, well, I'm going to appreciate this kind of negativity if it's from my own party. The same kind of thing that manifests itself when the political leader calls for undiluted support of all his party members to the exclusion of anything of any merit of the other party. And they call that survival. We have to survive as a party. But it's also very basic, too. We have to survive our busy schedules by not getting back to people who we promised we'd get back to. Or when we're in a room, in a county room where you're deliberating something important, but you don't stand up and say, I think, Mr. County Manager, or the head of the finance department, you are too aggressively portraying the county's finances. Hate to say it, you find a way to do it nicely, but how many of us don't want to do that because we're afraid of calling attention to ourselves or stigmatizing ourselves, maybe saying the wrong thing, being embarrassed, being called out, whatever the reason. And these are examples of the way we ignore duty, ignore a duty, usually truthfulness, to serve self-interest, but we call it survival. It's a way of elevating self-interest into a duty. This is the most pernicious problem of integrity, and it's the issue of integrity in a nutshell. How we tend to equate what we want with what we deserve. And we equate self-interest with duty. Now, this is something that's hard to understand, so I want to give some examples of this. How would you imagine, for instance, everybody know about the Pinto case? When Ford Motor Company had the Pinto and rear-end collision, right? And the people who were in the car died. Fiery death. And so they gathered all the Ford executives. You aware of this? And they gathered everybody together and they said, well, what should we do? And the question was whether we fix for $11 per car, recall the cars, fix them for $11, or do we pay $200,000, which was the going rate at the time for human death. And how would you like to, and this is what I talk to my students about when we teach integrity, how would you like to have been in that room and not know how to do it? Not know how to stand up and say that my duty of truthfulness requires me to say that a human life cannot be equated with an $11, with $200,000. Not in this situation, not in any situation. But nobody did. And my students always say, well, I would have. I really think I would have. Just like everybody says that if you're at a dinner party and someone makes a racist comment or an anti-Semitic comment, they would say something. Or they would stop by the side of the road if somebody were lying there. And the reality is that we don't. Because we don't see it. The truth of the matter is that we think we'll do things when the moment arrives, but when it arrives, we don't see it. We don't know how to do it. And as an example of this, I want to tell you about, and you're probably aware of this, the incident involving Justice Scalia. Do you remember this? He went on a hunting trip with Dick Cheney. Now, this wasn't the one where the guy got shot, right? Okay. This was a different one. And there's nothing about that was particularly unusual, except this, that the hunting trip, and by the way, he went down on the vice president's plane. What was unusual about it was that it happened 3 weeks after the Supreme Court decided to hear the case involving Vice President Cheney. Remember that task force he had on energy? Keith, you might be familiar with. And so there was a litigation about that. So they asked him, Mr. Justice Scalia, don't you think that there's something about that, a conflict of interest? And he said, this is what he said: I don't believe that my impartiality can reasonably be questioned. And I have to believe that in that particular situation, in that day, he was the only person in America who could say that with a straight face. How could it be that his impartiality could not be questioned in a case like that? And it's the same thing with physicians that go off to Hawaii on junkets from pharmaceutical companies and then claim they can be clinically objective. Or CEOs who are responsible for outlining bonus criteria and say, I can be objective. I will not design it to favor my particular strong qualities. People don't see it. Which line is longer? Okay, so you guys know this one, right? Everybody's seen it? I just saw it, I remember maybe seeing it years ago, but what do you first usually say, right? Okay. Well, of course, they're the same. We think these lines are different lengths, but they're not. We think we're different, but we're not. So let me tell you a funny story. Okay, guys, you want to hear this? This is a great joke. I went out to Chicago where my best friend lives, and I get this a lot, and it's sometimes very difficult. His wife comes up to me and says, you're a teacher of integrity. I got to ask you this question. You got to tell me the answer. I said, okay, what is it? She says, well, I was sitting around the break room outside the OR. She's a nurse with my fellow nurses, or I should say my sister nurses. And we were talking, we were gabbing, and one of my friends starts saying to me, hey, I really think it's wrong that you swear in front of your son. And she said, well, I don't think it is. I don't think it's really your problem. She said, yeah, but you've been swearing in front of him since he was really little. In fact, he's 22. You've been doing it for a long time. And she listens. She tries to defend herself. And the woman keeps going on and on. Finally, Gail, my friend's wife, gets exasperated and says, I don't know how you can spend all this time berating me for swearing in front of my son when everybody knows you're sleeping with the minister and you're both married? And she's shocked for a second, then she says, that's different. And how many times have we heard ourselves say that? So we have this confidence in our own intuition. And that's why so many of you said, well, I think it's, to thine own self be true, to deal honestly, do what you think is right, do the right thing. But if you were Justice Scalia, remember, this is a Supreme Court justice. And I don't think anybody really thought he was doing the right thing. Do you know that if he were another federal judge, any kind of federal judge other than a Supreme Court justice, he would have been barred from hearing that case? But the Supreme Court doesn't have any rules about it. It doesn't have any ethical rules of conduct. They leave it up to them. Remember what we said about integrity? When there's no code, how do you deal with conflicts? When there's no code, which is most of what we deal with in life. So to him, to thine own self be true, thinking, his conscience, whatever, that's what he came up with. To listen to a case after he went duck hunting with the guy. Right after they granted this. Okay, so how do you deal then with this potential for self-interest infecting our decision-making when we don't even realize it? So I want to ask you a question, and maybe the women know this. Does the name Virginia Apgar mean anything, the Apgar test? Okay, so would you explain what it is?
The test they gave to newborns, as soon as they born, I actually don't know what the
test
is, but everybody cares about the Apgar score of their kid.
Okay, so I don't know what the test is either. If you forced me to, I could probably speak about 30 seconds on it. Something having to do with respiration and, neurological. Okay, but what was happening was all these educated physicians in the delivery room or in the birth room were making decisions based on all their years of education and the varieties based on their intuition. Remember, these are the highest educated people in the world, physicians. And they're making these decisions, and it was so erratic that babies were dying, trusting their intuition and their judgment on the spot. So someone said to her, Virginia Apgar, an anesthesiologist in the 50s, well, what would you do? And she was at lunch, and she wrote down on an envelope, well, here's the 5 things you need to look for. And just look for these things. And if there's a certain number of points, then do this. And if they're not, then don't do it. And it's been in existence for 60 years. So the APGAR for integrity. Now, I was wondering who was going to get to that, right? So the APGAR for integrity is, number 1, if you start thinking about what you're going to do in terms of survival, the chances are you're using that as a code word for elevating self-interest into a duty. It is a surefire way of ignoring a duty. You ask yourself then, when I use the word survival or related terms like my duty to myself, or my duty of loyalty to myself, my family comes first, code words like that, or one hand washes the other. I'm not going to do that because they didn't. Anything that starts smacking of, I have to get by, then you know that it's probably not true survival, because we already went through that. It's probably something else. It's probably collusion. you're colluding in the concealment of another duty, usually truthfulness. So that's test number one. If you find yourself using language like that, pretty clear you're defaulting into self-interest and elevating self-interest to the status of duty. The second thing, if when an issue comes up and you can't think of more than one duty, and one duty seems so clear and you latch on to that duty, chances are you're missing something. Chances are that duty is tied to self-interest. Because in our profession, it's almost always a question of a competition between multiple duties. And that's the hard part, understanding what they are. Maybe some of you, does anybody actually work with a personal definition of integrity that they hold in their office? And I'm not going to ask you to read it, but does anybody actually have that? Okay, that's good. So a couple, one or two. And the question is, how often do you look at it, and how specific is it? Because I believe that the question should be, what are the applicable duties in the situation? Again, if you come up with only one, the chances are you're doing that, you're obscuring the whole picture to serve one duty. Now we're going to see a film sequence. This is the part that we get to see the film, and it's a great film. It's Saving Private Ryan. Has anybody not seen this film? Okay, just a few people. So briefly, are there any film buffs in the room who just want to sort of quickly explain what this is about? Anybody want to volunteer? Bob? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So a family has multiple sons who go to war. All but one son survives, and so a gentleman is sent out to find the surviving son, to make sure he's part of the and Tom Hanks is in it. Very good.
Thank you. That was excellent. Okay, so we're going to see the film, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit. We're going to analyze it a little bit. Okay, ready? By the way, it's very difficult to hear, but thanks to Bob and others who've been working on this, and Latrez, I want to thank you again for all that you've done to make this presentation. We've got it working, but we also, as a backup, have the dialogue on a sheet, on a single sheet in front of you, so you can use that as a crutch. Okay, ready? Powerful. Does anybody want to try to explain what was happening in that? I'd appreciate, I'm happy to do it, but I'd love to hear what your impressions are. Anybody want to try? What's happening in that sequence? Okay, so they come upon a machine gun nest, and what are most of the soldiers saying? Survival. It is real survival. There's no question about that. We want to avoid it. And what is Tom Hanks saying? Okay, so he's saying, well, what about the next company that comes through? He's speaking the language of duty, isn't he? Okay, he's not saying this is our duty, but he's saying we have a duty to them. What else? What about the Air Force? I had to see that after a while, many times. But the Air Force, you don't want to compel the Air Force to waste ordnance on a single machine gun, okay? He's thinking about them. What's the line, though, that's really, really powerful? That when I saw the movie, which was really before I did any of this work or was a teacher of any kind, it kind of blew me away. The Saving Private Ryan expert in the back.
Who knew? The distinction between mission and objective, our objective is to win the war.
Our objective is to win the war. He's blowing them away, sorry for the pun, with the largest possible conception of duty. All those soldiers are stuck in one duty. Now, granted, they don't want to die, but either does Tom Hanks. They're stuck in one duty. Remember what I said, if you can only think of one duty, that's a tip-off that you might not be thinking in terms necessary to practice integrity. Because integrity usually involves other duties, competing duties. And he is saying, our objective is to win the war, so let's bring that down to earth. You go into the office like I do, and you see a pile of papers. And it's probably really hard to remember that you are elected representatives or appointed, and your job is to serve what may be the greatest experiment in government in the history of the world, our country. And maybe it's not, but it's a damn good working principle. And it's hard to see that when there's a pile of papers in front of you, because all you're trying to do is what? Survive, get through it, and not think about your objective.
I would argue that Ryan captain is wrong. Their duty was whatever their mission was. It wasn't to jeopardize the successful completion of that duty that they were assigned. And in that scenario, it looks like certainly that it was dangerous enough that it might have resulted in the death of some of those soldiers which might have jeopardized the duty that they had that day.
Well, that is an excellent point. And his commanding officers might have agreed. We don't know. But that's the thing about integrity. It's not without risk. The risk is in daring to see the larger objective, the largest possible duty. Now, I'm sure, sir, that Tom Hanks, Captain Miller, in this fictionalized account, ran through that in his head. Was he jeopardizing the mission? But it's interesting that the soldiers never really said that. They said we can accomplish our objective without having to do this. They never said we are sacrificing our objective. Isn't that interesting in the dialogue? No one ever said that, what you just said. And Tom Hanks, as the commanding officer, made the decision that we can accomplish both. And they did. Yes, sir.
I'm going to disagree with Mr. Peterson on that here. I think that Tom Hanks got it exactly right. And let me bring it down to maybe a lower, more comprehensive level. You're walking down the hallway, there's an obstacle on the floor that someone behind you see it, but someone behind you, coming behind you, might trip over it. What do? You say, oh, well, if they trip over it, they'll pick it up. No, you bend over, you pick it up. You get it out of the way. That's all he was doing there. He understood, like you said, the bigger picture and where his duty that day, or his mission, if you will, that was fitting into a bigger picture, but he kept in mind the big picture all the time. He bent over and picked that up out of the way. As inconvenient as that was, and they sacrificed one man, as we know later on. Right. But, you know, that's why you travel in groups back then in war, you know, if you need it now. You travel in groups because, you know, some of you aren't coming back. And that's the risk as a leader that he was willing to take. He was going to bend over and pick up what that obstacle, which is integrity.
We love people. The reason we revere integrity is because we love people who keep the big picture in mind. And when you think, that person I admire because they keep the big picture in mind, think about duty. Do they have the largest conception of duty? And usually they do. I'm going to give you an example. If any of you know this, I was shocked to hear this. And if any of you know it, I'd be interested to hear, because I never knew this. You know that Abraham Lincoln lost the election of 1864 among the civilian vote? The American people defeated Abraham Lincoln. So how did he win? The very people in a position to be jeopardized permanently by their own death were the ones who had enough vision of the large duty. And that's what motivates you to put aside self-interest. The largest conception of duty is so compelling that it takes over, and it's your own APGAR test, ma'am. It's like, if I can see that, then I know I'm on the right track. But remember, it's not a question of denying the other one, the other duties involved. And this leads us to perhaps the third and most pernicious myth, in my view. I see your hand, sir. Let me see if I can get you in a second. Let me get through this. This is what we normally associate with integrity. I mean, you see this in Washington all the time. And you see it among your colleagues. That somehow it's equated with loudness, public stands, uncompromising positions. Is that the way Tom Hanks sounded? Okay. So what did he say? Well, just think of the language. Try to compare yourselves in your county room, you know, when you're deliberating. Who is the person who says, I hear what you're saying? I hear what you're saying. Well, he doesn't raise his voice, no swearing, not putting anybody down, right? And it's never about him. It's never about him. He detaches his own ego from the deliberation. What a different kind of approach that is than this, which we honor in our society. You see, I think if maybe you've reached something of this conclusion, or maybe I've persuaded you that most of our beliefs about integrity are not founded. Are not well founded. It's not innate. You have to learn how to do it. It's not about right versus wrong. It's about right and drawing balances. It's not about boisterous assertions and uncompromising public stands. It's about deliberative weighing. And it's also not about this, the last myth. It's not about failing permanently when you fail once. So my belief, tried to keep my beliefs out of it as we explored this together. My beliefs, but I believe that myths dominate our conception of integrity, and they're misleading us. And that it is about the hard, laborious work of identifying duties, and all of them, and then balancing them, and doing it modestly. This is not easy. Why would someone do this? You know, if you believe what my wife said, and I look 80, even though I'm 60, one thing that you get to when you're of a certain age is you start saying, well, I can go two directions in my life. You can go with self-assurance, everything I've done is right, and look for ways to justify it. Or you could say, I'm going to take a risk and start questioning my own cherished beliefs. That if I'm dogmatic about something, that's probably a danger sign, not a sign of virtue or of integrity. And if I'm immodest, if I lack humility, and this is the hardest part, very hard to do, that's also a sign that I'm not ready to deliver a message of integrity because I'm still too caught up in my own ego about my position. And this is the challenge that we have if you want to practice integrity. And it's important not to be, if you believe it's hard work, then do it. Set that moral compass toward authentic personal beliefs, not convention and contrivance and what's easy. And that's not an easy thing to do. But if you do it, you'll be rewarded, as you know. And I want to leave you with this quote, which I think kind of sums it up. I'll read it. On the mountains of truth, you can never climb in vain. Either you will reach a point higher up today, or you will be training your power so that you will be able to climb higher tomorrow. Integrity is a practice. You are not either right or wrong. It's like falling in love. Just because you break up or get divorced doesn't mean you can't be in love. I'm sorry, but that's the best example I thought of because it is the same thing. You breach it, you get back into the game, and you try again. Just make sure you use rules that can be relied upon, not your own intuition, which is, as I think we've indicated, unreliable. Now, questions. How much time do we have, Latrez? 15 minutes. Sir, you had a question in the back and you were patient. Perhaps I answered it, you forgot it, or you don't care. Yes, sir.
I didn't have a question. I got a comment.
Okay.
1970, I was in a combat helicopter and flew into a combat mission in South Vietnam, to the very south of Vietnam. And you know, the helicopter would come in at about 3,000 feet, it spins, and you sit down. The first soldier I saw, I counted 25 bullet holes in his chest when he took on a machine gun. Now, I only bring this up because I'm a combat veteran, and when you use examples like that, it's pretty easy to sit here and judge those men. But if you've never faced that, what our soldiers are facing today, you don't know. Like I said, and that man was alive. He lived for 30 minutes until he bled out. Yeah. And so, determining integrity can be very difficult. But that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's a tough thing to go through. I don't think anybody would blame those soldiers for wanting to survive, of course, and for citing perfectly good reasons. They were good reasons. But I go back to something we said earlier, that integrity is difficult. We can always understand why someone has a particular point of view. But if we're interested in practicing integrity, we need to reach out, not just to other points of view in the abstract. We hear that a lot, you know, honor what somebody else says, and communication involves listening. But the goal, remember, is to identify the duties. And if you don't have the largest conception of duty, you're going to get trapped. And it's hard. And that's why I showed this clip. Because as some of us, you sir, pointed out, Tom Hanks doesn't want to die any more than anybody else. I think that's a given. But he's also determined to give voice to the most powerful, compelling, and largest sense of duty that he can possibly imagine, so that he knows what to do. Yes, sir.
Isn't it relevant here? You know, in my life, I try to validate everybody's opinion. Everybody is valid. I don't think there was a lack of integrity on the part of the men. But the relevance to us here is Tom Hanks. He's the leader. We're the leaders. There's the relevance. The point that you just made is that we need to keep in mind the bigger picture all the time, so that when we have right-thinking people in our troops, we can still keep them in the right direction with the bigger picture. I think that's relevant. It isn't that somebody thinks different so they're wrong. Like you said, it's right, and the leader has to keep the bigger picture. Sorry, if you're going to be a leader, you have to keep the bigger picture in mind.
That's right, and thank you, and you're all leaders. Every one of you is here at this convention because you're leaders. And I'd be curious, and I invite you, by the way, to write to me. If you tried this system, ask yourself, like, how many times in the course of a day, just try this for 24 hours, that you find yourself thinking about survival as an entitlement to act in a certain way. Like, I got to do this. I can't even think of anything else. I got to do this for myself. I got to do this for my family. I have to leave work without finishing the memo to attend my son's soccer game, because that comes first. Language is survival like that. Just make a note of how many times you do that. You'd be astonished. And then when you face a decision, write down what the duties are and ask yourself, am I going as large as I can with this? What is the largest possible conception of this duty? Not what my political party wants. Even if you don't do anything with it, just do it for yourself. Not what my party wants, not what my campaign contributor wants, not what the public wants. What is the largest conception of duty that I can ascertain? Not me, but me as a discerning individual, which is what Tom Hanks was. He has no personal interest in it. He is an actor, a soldier, as you are, in this army that we call public service. That's your duty, to ascertain the largest conception of duty. And it's not easy. And you're always trying to get higher. But remember that pile of papers. Yes, sir.
Is your message, I'm getting a little bit confused here, but is your message actually that as far as integrity goes, it can never be about you?
If it's about you, it's not that it can never be about you, but if it's about you, the chances are you're going down the wrong track. It's a signal. It's an APGAR test. You know, some of those doctors were fine making their judgments by intuition. Okay, they had the skill, but it was the variability over the long haul that required a test. So we said that part of our APGAR test, if it's about you, that's usually a danger sign. Trust it. Try to understand that you might be that the danger is that you're going to put self-interest in front of. And remember, this is integrity, not ethics. You look up the book. I'm sure you've gone to all the seminars, take your white lined paper, write down everything they say. Someone's not allowed to spend $26.50 on your lunch. Okay, so you memorize that. Okay. Integrity is a lot harder because there is no rule, there's no book. And so the guide has to be, and this is the key, how do I figure out if self-interest is infecting my decision? Because I'm not even going to know. Like those lines on the test. Scalia didn't even know. Are you smarter than a Supreme Court justice? I hope so. He's pretty smart. Yes, ma'am.
I think it's interesting it says on the mountain of truth, it doesn't say on the mountain of integrity, because you're talking about this between right and right. So both options can be true, but one's better than the other. And the one that's better is the one that doesn't self-serve.
Well, no. Okay, one's larger than the other. That fellow who left, the vet, I don't want to, or sir, your point about those soldiers doing the right thing by just wanting to go with the mission. I don't want to say that one is better than the other. One is larger than the other. And integrity exists in a space of largeness. You know? Well, the largest conception of service.
Convictions rather than measuring out the pros and cons. How do you get convictions if you haven't measured out what's right, what's wrong, what's best, what's bigger, what's selfish? How do you get those convictions?
Well, you know, I think we probably have to stop because we're losing everybody, and maybe we just make this the last question and comment, and then I'll be around. I'm not going anywhere. And there's a chocolate reception I'm most interested in tonight. So, Integrity, don't think of integrity as about convictions. Crazy, right? That's what it's supposed to be. Assert your conviction. I'm saying if you take one thing out of here, when you start saying, this is right, these are my convictions, that is the moment you say, I need to question them.
Is it your conviction that the bigger picture is a better way?
It's not, okay, so this is why we spend a day. This is why, you know, when I do this for in corporate settings and political counties that bring me in, we spend a day because I can't, it's right? You can't use better. That's the language of right and wrong. That's the language of blame. That's not the way you're going to get integrity out of people. That's the labeling that we do. That's the danger. That's what we do to ourselves. That's why we don't even speak up. We censor ourselves before we speak up. One of the biggest problems I find in corporations when I do it is not that people lack integrity, they just don't know who to ask for guidance. You're elected officials, the buck stops with you guys. It's tough. You got to figure it out for yourself, and it's hard. But it's not about blame. It's not about making mistakes, because everybody makes them. And it's not about right and wrong. And remember, you're not defective if sometimes you don't know how to do it. That's a myth about integrity, that it comes full-blown out of our backgrounds, because we all had great mothers and fathers or whoever was our caregiver. It's a lot more complicated than that. Well, thank you very much.